Imagine a thirst so violent that drinking salt water feels like the only logical choice, even though you know it will kill you. That is the biological reality of addiction. We often talk about it as a choice or a lack of moral character, but when 90% of people who try to quit on their own fail within the first few weeks, we have to admit that the standard narrative is missing something crucial. The brain of someone in the grip of addiction can take up to 2 years to return to baseline. 2 years. Most people try to fight a biological war with a few weeks of willpower, and when they fail, they internalize it as a personal defect. But here is the uncomfortable truth that changes everything. You cannot simply stop being addicted. You cannot just delete a behavior that has rewired your survival instincts. The approach we are going to explore today suggests that the only way out is not to fix the broken version of yourself, but to let that version die completely so a new one can be born. The Japanese have a specific phrase for this, Kishi Kaisai. It literally means to wake from death and return to life. When we combine this ancient philosophy with modern behavioral neuroscience, we stop fighting a losing battle against our own biology and start engineering a recovery that actually sticks. But before we get to the method, we have to understand the trap. And the best way to understand the trap is to look at someone who seemed to have every reason to stay safe, yet lost it all. Let's talk about Amelia. At 23, Amelia was the person everyone else wanted to be. She was an architecture student, brilliant, driven, dreaming of designing sustainable housing. She had a plan: marriage, children, a career that mattered. On the surface, her structure was sound, but underneath, the foundation was rotting. Since she was 14, she had been carrying the weight of an alcoholic, absent father and a mother who worked herself to the bone just to keep the lights on.
Amelia learned early on that her job was to be perfect, to be the one thing her mother didn't have to worry about. That pressure creates a very specific kind of internal silence, a void. And at 19, in the middle of a brutal semester, someone offered her something to help with the stress, just something to take the edge off. This is where the risk quietly increases, often without us noticing. Amelia didn't start using because she wanted to party. She started using because she wanted to function. It began recreationally, then weekly, then daily. Amelia wasn't unintelligent. She saw her grades slipping. She saw the light going out of her mother's eyes. She knew, logically, that she was destroying the future she had worked so hard for. But logic has no power when your operating system has been hijacked. To understand why Amelia couldn't just say no, you have to understand the machinery inside your skull. We all have a reward system. It is an ancient, primitive circuit designed to keep us alive. When you eat, bond with friends, or achieve a goal, this system releases dopamine. It's a chemical signal that says, "This is good, do it again to survive." Drugs, however, are a superstimulus. They hack this system. A substance like cocaine or methamphetamine doesn't just release dopamine, it floods the system with 10 times the amount of a natural reward. It is like taking the pleasure button in your brain and slamming it down with a sledgehammer. And the brain, trying to protect itself from this overstimulation, adapts. It reduces its own dopamine receptors. It stops producing natural pleasure chemicals. The result is terrifying. The things that used to make you happy, a sunset, a good meal, a conversation, now feel like nothing. You become chemically incapable of feeling joy without the substance. But that is only half the problem. The other half is what happens to your judgment. The prefrontal cortex is the CEO of your brain. It handles impulse control,
future planning, and rational decision-making. In a healthy brain, the CEO can look at a donut or a drink and say, "Not now, we have goals." But in an addicted brain, the connection between the primitive reward system and the CEO is severed. The primitive brain screams, "I need this to survive," and the CEO is gagged and bound in the closet. So when people asked Amelia, "Why don't you just stop?" they were asking her to use a part of her brain that had effectively gone offline. She was driving a car downhill with no brakes, and everyone was shouting at her to just slow down. Rock bottom for Amelia came on a Tuesday morning. She woke up and couldn't recognize the face in the mirror. She had lost 25 pounds. She had been fired from her internship. But the breaking point was the memory of her mother crying the night before, asking the air, "What happened to my little girl?" In that moment of clarity, Amelia realized she had two options left: get help or die. There was no third door. She reached out to a center that paired her with a therapist named Dr. Kenji Yamamoto. Kenji wasn't your typical clinician. He was a man of few words with a calm intensity that made you feel like he was reading the footnotes of your soul. He held degrees in Western psychology and neuroscience, but his approach was deeply rooted in the Eastern philosophies he learned from his grandfather. When Amelia walked into his office, shaking, eyes sunken, waiting for the lecture, Dr. Kenji just sat there. He didn't ask about her drug usage statistics. He didn't scold her. He asked 3 questions. When do you feel most alone? What were you trying not to feel the first time you used? If you could talk to 14-year-old Amelia right now, what would you tell her? He listened for 2 hours. He listened to the trauma, the perfectionism, the crushing weight of expectations. And when she was done, he placed a glass of water on the desk between them. He said, "Amelia, the problem is The drug. The drug is just what you are pouring into the glass." He pointed to the glass. "You have a hole inside you. It comes from trauma, from a lack of purpose, from a spiritual disconnect. You have been trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. You can pour the ocean into it, and it will never be full. You are trying to treat the thirst, but you need to repair the vessel." Amelia looked at him, confused and desperate. "So I just need more willpower?" "No," Kenji said softly. "Willpower is a finite resource. You cannot fight a reprogrammed brain with willpower alone. We are not going to try to fix the addict version of Amelia. That version is caught in a loop. We are going to do something the Japanese call Kishi Kaisai." He wrote the characters on a whiteboard. "It means to wake from death and return to life. You must accept that the old Amelia, the one who needed to be perfect, the one who carried all that pain, she has to die. And that is okay, because in her place, we are going to build someone new, someone stronger, someone whole." This wasn't just a poetic metaphor. It was a strategy based on neuroplasticity. The brain is not static, it is plastic. It can be rewired. But to rewire it, you cannot just remove the drug. If you remove the drug but leave the hole in the cup, the misery remains and relapse is inevitable. This is why 90% of people fail. They focus entirely on stopping the behavior and 0% on building a life that doesn't require the behavior to make it bearable. Dr. Kenji laid out a plan based on 3 overlapping circles. The first circle was Kishi Kaisai, the mindset of total rebirth. The second circle was Kaizen, the practice of continuous 1% improvement. The third circle was Ikigai, finding a reason for being. "You won't wake up cured tomorrow," Kenji told her. "That is a fantasy. But if you trust the process, if you focus on the daily architecture of your life rather than just the demolition of your bad habits, brain will follow. The executive control will return. The dopamine receptors will heal. But you have to be willing to walk through the fire." Amelia didn't know if she had the strength. She felt empty, fragile, and terrified. But looking at the diagram on the table, for the first time in years, she saw something other than a dead end. She saw a map. The journey she was about to undertake would be the hardest thing she ever did. It would require more than just saying no. It would require a complete reconstruction of her reality, from the way she slept to the way she thought about God. And this is where the advice sounds right, but can still be dangerous if you don't understand the nuance. Most people think recovery is a straight line up. It isn't. It is a jagged mess of biology fighting psychology. To understand how Amelia actually did it, and how you can apply this to any addiction, whether it's substances, technology, or toxic relationships, we need to break down the practical steps. We need to look at how she used Kaizen to retrain her dopamine response, and how she found her Ikigai when she felt she had nothing left to offer the world. Because the science is clear. You don't conquer darkness by fighting it directly. You conquer it by turning on a light so bright that the darkness simply has nowhere to stand. Here is how she began the reconstruction. The first 30 days were not a journey of self-discovery. They were, quite literally, hell on earth. Detoxification is the physical price the body pays for the chemical loans it took out.
Amelia faced tremors, cold sweats, insomnia, and an anxiety so sharp it felt like it was physically tearing her apart from the inside. But Dr. Kenji was there, sometimes twice a week, not to coddle her, but to teach her how to operate the machinery of her own mind. He introduced her to a concept from cognitive behavioral therapy, but he framed it through the lens of meditation. He told her, when the desire comes, and it will come,
like a tsunami, you do not fight it. If you fight a wave, you drown. You observe it. He taught her the technique of urge surfing. Most people think a craving will last forever until they give in, but the data shows that a physiological craving usually peaks and subsides within 15 to 30 minutes. If you can surf that wave for 20 minutes without reacting, the brain chemistry settles. Amelia learned to look at her craving and say, "Interesting, I am feeling a desire. My chest is tight, my hands are sweating. I will just watch this happen." She wasn't the addict anymore, she was the observer of the addict. Once the physical storm began to settle, they moved to the second circle, Kaizen, the philosophy of continuous 1% improvement. Dr. Kenji gave her a simple rule. Every single day, you do 3 things. 1 thing for your body, 1 thing for your mind, 1 thing for your soul. For her body, Amelia started walking, just 20 minutes. She didn't try to run a marathon, just 20 minutes of moving forward. For her mind, she started reading again, not complex architecture theory, but simple narratives, just 5 pages a day to retrain her focus. For her soul, she wrote in a gratitude journal, 3 lines, that was it. It sounds almost too simple to work, doesn't it? But here is the part most people miss. The brain loves dopamine. By setting small, achievable goals and hitting them, Amelia was giving her brain microdoses of natural dopamine. She was teaching her reward system that effort leads to satisfaction. Those 20 minutes of walking turned into running, the 5 pages turned into books, the 3 lines turned into deep reflection. This is the compound interest of self-improvement. But recovery is never a straight line. In the 8th week, Amelia relapsed. She had a bad day, a trigger she didn't see coming, and she fell. She used. The next morning, the shame was so heavy she almost didn't go back to Dr. Kenji. She felt she had zeroed out all her progress. When she told him, expecting disappointment, he simply nodded. Relapse is not a failure of character, Amelia. It is data. What happened right before? What was the trigger? The goal isn't to never fall. The goal is to get up faster than you did last time. That is Kishi Kaisai. They analyzed the trigger, adjusted the plan, and she kept walking. She didn't restart at day 0. She continued from day 57, just with a scraped knee. Then came the 4th month, and the 3rd circle, Ikigai. The church support group Amelia attended was organizing a construction project for low-income housing. They needed volunteers. Amelia went, mostly to keep her hands busy. But as she stood on that site, smelling the sawdust and seeing the raw frame of a house, something dormant in her brain woke up. She started sketching. She saw a way to improve the window placement for better light. She saw a way to reduce waste in the materials. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about her pain, or her past, or her next fix. She was thinking about the work. She was in flow. When she told Dr. Kenji about it, he smiled. You found it. That is your Ikigai, the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, and what the world needs. Amelia re-enrolled in college. It wasn't easy. She had to retake classes. She was older than the other students. She worked a humble job at an architecture firm just organizing files. But she was rebuilding. 2 years later, the woman who stood in front of Dr. Kenji was unrecognizable. She was a junior architect. She was leading a support group for other women. She had met a man, a history professor, who loved her not for her perfection, but for her resilience. She had died to her old self and been reborn. So, how do we take Amelia's specific story and turn it into a universal protocol? If you are watching this and fighting your own battle, or watching someone you love fight theirs, here is the manual. It starts with the
environmental engineering. We like to think we are masters of our fate, but the truth is, your environment is stronger than your willpower. If you put a disciplined person in a toxic environment, the environment eventually wins. you must shape your space. This means eliminating friction for good habits and increasing friction for bad ones. If your addiction is digital, you don't sleep with your phone in the room. If it's a substance, you cannot have it in the house and you cannot hang out with the people who do it. You have to be ruthless. You are protecting a recovering brain. Next, you must prioritize the biology. Sleep is the foundation of everything. Sleep deprivation reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, your brain's CEO, and increases activity in the amygdala, the anxiety center. A tired brain is a brain that cannot say no. You need 7 to 9 hours, non-negotiable. Then you add movement. Exercise is not just about vanity, it is neuroregeneration. Physical exertion releases endorphins and serotonin, and it actually helps rebuild the dopamine receptors damaged by addiction. It is the most powerful natural antidepressant we have. And finally, you need the spiritual dimension. And I don't necessarily mean organized religion, though that helps millions. I mean the realization that you are part of something larger than your own suffering. Addiction is a disease of extreme self-centeredness, not out of selfishness, but out of pain. The addict is trapped inside their own head. Ikigai, service, and connection pull you out of your head and back into the world. But let's look closer at the concept of the void Dr. Kenji mentioned. We live in a culture that tells us to pursue happiness, but happiness is a fleeting emotion. What we actually need is meaning. The studies on this are fascinating. People who have a clear sense of purpose, a clear Ikigai, have significantly lower relapse rates. Why? Because they have something to lose. They have a reason to endure.
The pain of discipline. If you are trying to quit something, you cannot just stare at the empty space where the addiction used to be. You have to build something new in that space. You have to find a project, a mission, a responsibility that demands the best of you. This leads us to the most difficult truth of all. You need a team. You need a therapist, a support group, a mentor, or a trusted friend. You need someone who knows the truth, someone you can call before you use, not just after. Amelia's story is not a fairy tale. It is a blueprint. It shows us that while the brain can be hijacked, it can also be reclaimed. Neuroplasticity is real. The brain you have today is not the brain you are stuck with. Every time you surf a craving, you are strengthening your prefrontal cortex. Every time you choose a healthy microhabit, you are laying down a new neural pathway. Every time you connect with another human being honestly, you are healing the reward system. It takes time. It takes between 90 days and 2 years for the brain to fully stabilize. That sounds like a long time, but the time will pass anyway. You can spend those 2 years in the cycle of shame and usage, or you can spend them walking the path of Kishi Kaisai. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be 1% better than you were yesterday. If you are in the dark right now, listen to me. You are not broken beyond repair. You are simply in the middle of a story that hasn't finished writing itself yet. The Japanese art of kintsugi involves repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer, making the piece more beautiful for having been broken. That is what you are doing. You are not just surviving. You are preparing to be reborn. The addiction is the death of the old you. Recovery is the birth of the true you. So identify your Ikigai, embrace Kaizen, trust the process. And remember, the sun also rises. If this video helped you see the path a little more clearly, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you are ready to start your own process of continuous improvement, I have a challenge for you. In the comments, write down just one small 1% action you will take today for your body, mind, or soul. Let's build that accountability together. Thank you for watching. Walk with honor. See you in the next video.